Muy buenos días. Muchísimas gracias a Rosco, la banda que nos ameniza desde ayer estas jornadas. Bienvenidos a esta segunda jornada de Enlighted 2022. Ya saben, el punto de encuentro sobre educación, tecnología e innovación. Y hoy, además, Guillermo, nos espera un día repleto de actividades y de cuestiones interesantes.
Totalmente, Mónica. Buenos días. Después de la jornada de ayer, que vivimos pues una jornada muy interesante, conocimos más cosas del metaverso, vivimos historias humanas tremendas, vimos proyectos fascinantes y hoy seguimos, porque empezamos fuerte y seguimos también con un tema muy importante. El tema va a ser la tecnología y la salud mental. Nuestro primer ponente es Alok Kanoja. Es psiquiatra, es presidente y cofundador de Healthy Gamer.
Y después de su presentación va a conversar con María Zavala, que es escritora, periodista, especializada en tecnología y en digitalización. Así que un fuerte aplauso. Vamos a escucharle.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alok Kanoja. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm honored to be here. So the first thing that I want to say is this is by far the coolest event that I've ever been to. Like, this is amazing. I've never seen so much innovation in the realm of education. I've gone to a lot of different conferences and stuff, but this is truly amazing, the work that y'all are doing here. So I'm honored to be able to give the keynote today. I'd love to share with you a little bit about who I am, a little bit about understanding technology and video games and the psychology of video games, as well as talking a little bit about video game addiction. And then I'd love to end with some general thoughts about how we can understand how technology is evolving, how human beings are evolving, and what people in the space of entrepreneurship and education, how we can understand some of the changes that are going on right now to try to capitalize on them so that we can actually offer sort of the best educational products and services to people out there. So as I mentioned, my name is Alok Kanoja. I'm a psychiatrist by training, but my story starts a long time ago. So I grew up in Texas in the United States, and growing up, I really loved video games. And what I loved about video games is that when I went to school, I was always bored. So the teacher would explain a couple of things, and I would kind of do my worksheet, but then at the second half of class, I was sort of done, and I really didn't have anything to do. And what I really liked about video games is that video games, as soon as I beat level 1, level 2 was waiting for me. That I didn't have to wait for the other students to catch up, and I could actually advance in the video game as rapidly as I wanted. And one of the really interesting things is if you look at students who get addicted to video games, the higher their IQ is, the more likely they are to get addicted, which is a really interesting point. So I ended up playing a lot of video games growing up, but it really wasn't a problem until I went to college. And when I went to college, I actually failed my first year. And I really struggled a lot because I didn't understand why I was skipping class. All I would want to do when I wake up in the morning is play video games, or in the afternoon. I actually failed my Spanish class, which is part of the reason that I'm speaking in English with you today. It really became a problem, and I failed my first year of college, and then my parents tried everything. So they tried to give me some tough love. They tried using discipline. They tried being very understanding and supportive. But this was about 20 years ago, and they just didn't really understand what they were dealing with because video game addiction wasn't a real thing back then. So I went into my second year of college and almost failed that one too. And then my dad pulled me aside and was like, look, Alok, this is just not working. Like, something about this is not working. Like, you seem kind of directionless in life. I don't really know how to help you anymore. So he made a suggestion. He said, I want you to go to India, and I want you to stay at an ashram, which is kind of like a monastery for monks. And so I agreed, and I spent the summer of my second year of college, or after my second year of college, at an ashram. And what I discovered there was really amazing. I started studying yoga and meditation, and what I really loved about it was that this was sort of a system of education that taught me about myself. So if we look at how education works right now, we teach students about everything outside of them. We teach them about history, we teach them about mathematics, we teach them about science, but we don't actually teach students about their own mind, their own body, their own desires and where they come from. Even if we look at psychology, if we look at classes on psychology, they don't teach the person about themselves. They teach them general experiments and general principles about human psychology. And I absolutely fell in love with this education on myself. What I really sort of was frustrated by is I knew I needed to wake up every day. I knew I needed to study. I knew I needed to work hard in school. I knew that grades were good or important, but I couldn't bring myself to do the things that I know I needed to do. And what I really found in India was a system of education for that. And I fell in love with it so much that I actually decided to become a monk. And I spent the next 7 years of my life studying yoga and meditation with the goal of becoming a monk. But then things sort of took a turn when I met my wife and sort of fell in love. And then the whole celibacy thing wasn't going to work out. So I fell in love and decided to kind of step away from the spiritual path and decided to go to medical school. Ended up becoming a psychiatrist because I had loved all these principles of the mind that I learned through meditation. And then ended up training at Harvard. And while I was there, started asking people about video game addiction. So it was something that I had struggled with. I still played video games, but it wasn't as much of a problem. So I talked to my mentors there, and that's when I sort of realized that technology is evolving very, very rapidly. The leaders in the field of psychiatry are usually like in their 50s, 60s, or 70s. Nothing against that by any means, but just that they didn't understand what video games were. And so as I was talking to people about it, I started to realize that there's a growing problem of video game addiction and that we're sort of like asleep at the wheel, that technology is evolving so rapidly and it's evolving in a harmful way because the people who are developing technology are not so concerned about the health and well-being of their users, which, by the way, is kind of interesting. So if you look at, there are two groups of people that are referred to as users. So drug dealers talk about their clients as users, and people who develop applications talk about their clients as users, right? So it's kind of interesting. So I really started to dive into video game addiction as a clinician and started to help people. And that's when I sort of discovered that there are a couple of reasons why people get addicted to video games. And essentially what happens is that as games have evolved, they start sort of taking advantage of and fulfilling different parts of our psychology. So if you look at my case, and there's evidence to support this as well, so video games offer people a sense of challenge, right? So a video game is very difficult, and it's actually perfectly paced to you. So if I lose on level 1, I don't fall behind, I get to repeat level 1. And I keep repeating level 1 until I succeed. And the moment I succeed, I enter level 2. So one thing that's really interesting is if we look at education, the pace of education is determined by either the average student or in some cases, the slowest student, right? Because we don't want to leave anyone behind, which means that the students who are actually the most successful are the ones that feel the most bored in school because there isn't sort of this personalized approach. Whereas if you look at a video game, it offers kind of this personalized level of challenge that is perfectly paced to the student or the player. The second thing about video games that is really interesting is that if you look at our sense of identity, video games let us create our own sense of identity. And this is something that we've seen. I've worked with people who are, let's say, high school students who are maybe 15 years old. Maybe they're a little bit overweight. They're going through puberty. Their voice is starting to change. They have acne. And they feel really embarrassed about who they are in real life. But in the video game, they get to be whoever they want to be. They don't get judged on how much they weigh or how they look. They get to invent an identity. And so what we've discovered is that gaming allows us to invent an identity that we can be really proud of. And that becomes a problem because at some point, we become more proud of the person that we are online as opposed to the person that we are in real life. And then we start to retreat more and more into the video game, and we sort of lose sight of who we are in real life. And then we get really stuck because I fall further and further behind in the real world, but I keep advancing in the virtual world. And then there comes a point where I start to ask myself, why would I even want to exist in this real world when I can be something amazing in the virtual world? And the virtual world makes it so much easier for us, right? If you think about a video game, everyone is designed to succeed in the video game. That's how they're designed. But when it comes to real life, it's not like someone crafted real life for everyone to be perfectly successful. The third thing that we tend to see about video games is that they offer a sense of community. So we know that all human beings really love and need community. And I actually absolutely love Spain. So I saw something really beautiful last night that I haven't seen in a long time. So I went out to dinner with my wife, and we were sitting at a restaurant, and there were 30 people there, and I didn't see a single cell phone. Everyone was sitting around, they were talking, they were having fun, they were sort of telling stories and laughing. And it's, especially if we look at the world today, I think this is really amazing that y'all still have this culture where people engage with each other. And what we've discovered, especially during the pandemic, is that games allow us a sense of community, right? So I can hop online, I can talk to my friends, we can play games together. But once again, people can get kind of stuck because at some point, the more time I spend online, the less I develop community in my real life. And at some point, I become so dependent on the community that I have online that it actually becomes hard for me to go out. I start to develop social anxiety. I start to feel uncomfortable with myself. I forget how to dress properly and how to be confident in my body. And as we sort of fall into that trap, now the only people I have are online. So what we sort of see with video games is that they can offer a lot of advantages. But over time, what can happen is we can start to substitute the real world for the video game. And we can start to meet our psychological needs in the video game as opposed to meeting them in the real world. And when we do that, that's how we end up in addiction. So as I saw these problems, I decided to sort of change the way that I was going to help these people. I realized very quickly that there was no way as a clinician sitting in my office working with one person at a time that I could make a serious impact in this problem. So I actually turned to one of the things that was sort of the enemy, right? So thinking about technology and streaming and video games, I started to actually use those tools to try to benefit those people. So I started streaming on Twitch. So show of hands, do you all know what Twitch is? Yes, no? Okay, some people. So Twitch is a live streaming platform that caters to gamers. So I did something really weird. I started showing up on Twitch and sort of giving lectures and talking to people about their mental health. And what I discovered was that there was a huge need for it because the people, the gamers, they were the ones who would have never come to my office, right? Because they're sitting at home. And so what I started to do is instead of making them come to me, I went to them. So we started streaming on Twitch. We started having conversations with gamers about their life and their mental health. And we exploded. We were the most quickly growing stream on Twitch for a few months during the pandemic. We hired our first employee in April of 2020, and we're now a team of about 130 people. We now reach about 4 to 5 million people a year across 77 countries. And so we've grown a lot. And what we really discovered is that there's a huge need for this kind of digital mental health support. And furthermore, that the old models of how we support people's mental health didn't seem to be working anymore. And so a lot of people will ask me questions. They'll say, okay, do you think technology is addictive? Do you think social media is bad? And everyone is sort of demonizing things like social media, technology, and video games. But at Healthy Gamer, one of the things that we've come to realize is that technology is here and it's here to stay. That sort of treating it like the enemy is actually not the right move. Instead, I think the real problem with technology right now is that it's been developed and used by people who are not trying to accomplish noble pursuits. So if we think about video game developers are not trying to make the world a better place. They're developing technology to try to sell video games and entertain people. If we look at things like social media, I don't think that social media platforms are evil, but I don't think that the people who develop social media platforms, their primary goal is to make the world a better place, right? Their primary goal is to try to disseminate content, generate ad revenue, and that's their primary goal. And so what I was really excited about, I was excited about the opportunity to come to this conference and talk to innovators in education, entrepreneurs in education, and really people who are focused on education, because I think the reason that we view technology as evil is because we haven't started using it yet, right? Even if we think about platforms like Zoom or other kinds of digital platforms that you use for education, they weren't designed for you. And I think if we really want to understand how can we as educators use technology for our benefit, how can we start to think about scalable solutions for education? How can we start to rethink education to really create the most beneficial experience for our students? And that's what we've tried to do at Healthy Gamers. So just to give you all kind of a quick example. So we have this thing called Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health, which is a course on mental health. But there are a couple things that are a little bit different about this course. The first is that when we think about a course, we think about it as linear, right? You start with lesson 1 and you go all the way to lesson 10. But our course on mental health has like kind of a branching logic, where when you come into the course, it gives you an assessment that sort of sees, okay, does this person suffer from anxiety? Do they suffer from depression? Do they have ADHD? And then based on their answers, it actually gives them a customizable track that sort of meets their educational needs. They also have choices where there are branch points where you can learn a little bit about, okay, how can I learn about meditation, or do I need to learn about medication? And so it sort of offers this branching logic. And I think that what we've tried to do at Healthy Gamer is create sort of customizable experiences for people that are both entertaining and helpful. And what I'd love to do today is to share with y'all a little bit about our perspective and really to try to equip y'all to understand, I mean, I'm sure you already do, but I would love it if people at this conference started to really think about using educational tools, using digital innovation to create the best product for the students, because they're the ones that matter. Hey. Good, how are you? I'll sit
Here. Hola a todos, buenos días. Vamos a hablar de tecnología y salud mental después de esta estupenda intervención de Alok, que yo creo que es muy interesante porque tendemos a centrarnos siempre en el impacto de la tecnología en las personas y no tanto en el impacto de las personas que utilizamos tecnología sobre nosotras mismas y sobre los demás, ¿no? Welcome to Spain, welcome to Enlighted. I think you said so many interesting things, but I wanted to start with something that you said at the beginning. When it comes to mental health and the use of video games or technology in general, we seem to keep being focused on the impact that technology has on us, on gamers, for example. And you said we don't know that much about ourselves. Our kids are growing up without the tools to know more about themselves, what they think, why they think the way they think, what they feel like, why they're impatient, why they're needy, why they're impulsive. Do you think that the common global narrative saying that video games are damaging to mental health is too strong for us to focus on the important one, which is to know ourselves better, parents knowing their kids better, kids knowing themselves better?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So I think that, part of the reason that the narrative is on addiction is because this is the impact that we're seeing, right? So parents nowadays are growing up with their kids playing Fortnite, not wanting to study, staying up super late, and then the parents are kind of at a loss because you try to set limits on your kid, but they say, but all my friends are doing it. And so the world has changed so rapidly, and I completely understand why people are focusing on addiction, because that's where we see the problems. I think the challenge, though, is that if we really look at it, the best antidote to video game addiction is actually self-understanding. So the challenge right now is that platforms are not regulating themselves, right? Their goal is to try to increase the amount of time that users use the platform. And furthermore, even if we look at policy and things like that, if we look at scientific studies, it takes 5 years to basically do a scientific study. And so the institutions that we've relied on to protect us are not moving as rapidly as technology is evolving, right? Does that kind of make sense to people? Like, technology is just moving so fast. And so our approach at Healthy Gamer is that we can't sort of rely on the government to fix the problem. We can't really rely on video game developers to fix the problem. So what we really have to do is teach people themselves about their own attention. How do you control your attention? How do you understand what your desires are? How do you accomplish what you want? And so our focus is on the individual because we sort of can't rely on anyone else to fix the problem for us, so we've got to fix it ourselves.
But do you realize that this means, and I ask you this question as a mother, I've got 3 children, 2 of them are gamers, that this means that in order to teach our children about self-regulation, self-understanding, emotions, impulses, we have to learn first ourselves and then have the patience, the willing, and the interest to do it. I'm not saying that parents won't have that,
but it's certainly more comfortable to keep focusing on what Fortnite or Minecraft or League of Legends will do to your child.
Oh, absolutely. So I'd love to tell you all the story.
How do we learn?
Yeah, so we have a coaching program where we help students and usually teenagers and older sort of help develop healthy technology habits. And so sometimes we'll get a phone call, and we'll get a phone call from a parent who's like, my son is addicted to video games, y'all really need to help him. And then we'll say, okay, well, tell us a little bit about it. And they'll say, yeah, they're addicted, they're addicted, they're addicted. You really need to help them, you really need to help them. Please take care of my son and fix him. Then we'll say, well, I apologize, but I don't know that your son needs our program. I think maybe you need our program. And then the parent says, no, I don't need anything. I'm not the one with the problem. My son is the one with the problem. And we say, well, we beg to differ. We've done 5 or 6 research studies on this, and what we discovered is that if your son is having trouble with technology, you're probably the one who needs to learn particular skills.
Right.
And this is the unfortunate truth, is that parents are on the front line, right? You can't expect your 15-year-old to regulate their video game addiction. You can't expect the game developer or the government or even pediatricians or teachers to solve the problem. And so what we've really discovered is that parents need new skills that they didn't need before. Because if you think about how do we learn how to be parents, we learn what our parents used with us. Well, when our parents were raising us, they didn't have to deal with technology addiction. This is a new thing. And what we're really discovering is that parents do need to learn a new set of skills to be effective in today's modern day and age.
But this is tricky because the D-scores that parents get every day, every single day of the week, every day of the year, when it comes to approaching your children and technology, understanding this new world, racing in a digital era, is that we have to know everything about the dangers of the internet and the dangers of technology. We don't get that much information about skills or resources that are there to help us regulate a gradual access to technology or a gradual autonomy and capacity of decision when it comes to digital activities. So in the end, we're the guilty ones, like we're to blame because we're not doing enough. But there's not that much information on how to change what we do because we keep being told about the dangers and the risks, and that doesn't lead us anywhere.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So let's start with a couple things. I don't think parents are to blame. So, because I don't think that it's fair to blame parents, because I think that this is new, right? The parents didn't create the problem. The parents they're not to blame, they're responsible. And there's a subtle difference there where like you're ultimately on the front line. And I think this is where we do hear a lot about the dangers of technology, and you're right that we don't see, we think that there's a new skill set that parents need, educators need, because it's not just parents. Because teachers are running into this problem as well, right? Where you'll see like, sometimes students will have toxic attitudes, everyone's kind of playing it, they're not paying attention, they're always on their cell phone. So teachers are sort of facing this as well. So the first thing is I'd say that parents are responsible, but they're not necessarily to blame. And I think the other problem that we sort of see is that when you are emphasizing the dangers of technology to a parent, and then that parent goes and sits with their child, what does that conversation look like? You've got to stop playing the video game. Don't you realize how terrible it is? Oh my God, I just read this thing. There was this student who was playing this video game, and they got doxxed, and they were stalked, and someone followed them. And so that paranoia and fear is front and center with the parent. Now, when you sit down and you talk to your kid, and you're like, oh my God, this is dangerous, how do you think your kid is going to respond to that? Do you think they're going to agree? Of course not. No, I play this game every day. There's nothing wrong with it. So from the very get-go, the parent is coming in with a completely different perception. And so parent and child are not on the same page. And then it becomes a push and pull, where I'm trying to convince you, no, it's okay to play a video game. I've been doing it my entire life. And the parent is like, no, it's not okay. So there's a fundamental disagreement.
Yeah.
And what we've really found is that the most effective thing to do for parents is to help them emotionally decompress.
Right. So it's not really about talking to your children about technology, not only about that, but about human feelings and the way we think and the way we react to experiences.
Absolutely, right? So, and I think this is the part of education that we as a society have not needed yet.
Right.
So we've never had multi-billion-dollar corporations trying to take our attention away. So in the past, like, it was hard for me to study and I would get distracted. It's hard for everybody to study. But now the difference is that there isn't a multi-billion-dollar corporation that's taking advantage of my distraction and trying to take a 5-minute distraction and turning it into spending hours on the internet. So I think we have to learn self-regulation of attention in a way that we've never had to before.
And also, maybe we're raising our children, each one of us at home, led by global messages. You know, when it comes to technology affecting attention, or technology involving distraction, or video games being potentially addictive. But we are led by common narratives which maybe don't apply to our children. I mean, we're using a lot of labels, addiction being one of them. I know the World Health Organization does have the recognition of a behavioral disorder when it comes to video games, but science hasn't really stated that same fact of addiction to tech or social media or smartphones, but we're labeling a whole generation as addicted. And that helps when it comes to awareness, but it also does not help because it creates a disorder among a lot of people who are not addicted clinically. As you said, sometimes we as parents identify a problem before there is a problem, maybe because we don't really know what they're playing. Like, I can't tell you how it was the first time I tried to play Fortnite with my 13-year-old.
Oh, you played Fortnite with your 13?
I lost my dignity. I mean, I couldn't control my body when I was parachuting down to the island. I couldn't kill anyone. I was saying, this is very violent, honey. He kept saying, Mom, this is not real. We're not killing anyone. And then I kept saying, you know, Fortnite media says this is bad because, you know, it may trigger your violence or won't let you live well. You'll become addicted. And he tried to explain me that all he kept doing was play in a mode that was called laboratory in Fortnite, which is you pretend you live in the island and you do things like travel through the island, build a house, or stuff like that. So it led to conversations with my son about the game. Do we adults, parents, educators need to understand that not all games are the same, that there are games better suited for different characters and personalities? I don't know, Fortnite is not Minecraft. League of Legends is not Animal Crossing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of things there. So the first thing is that there's a group of researchers out of University of Toronto that have developed a personality-based assessment that determines why particular people like particular video games. So what they've sort of discovered is that we have different personalities, and depending on your personality, you are more likely to enjoy or get addicted to a particular video game. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, so games fulfill different psychological needs. So sometimes we as human beings like to explore, right? So kids will like to explore. You know, hundreds of years ago, we had explorers who would sail across the ocean. So there's like this very basic drive of human beings to explore. And sometimes those can get activated or satisfied through video games. So I do think that we need to understand that not all video game addiction is the same, even not all technology addiction is the same. That's a core part of our philosophy. And that gets complicated because once you sort of assign something as video game addiction, there's this idea in medicine that, you know, if it's an addiction, there's a particular problem and there's a particular treatment. If we think about COVID, for example, COVID is generally considered to be somewhat uniform in their particular treatments and precautions for COVID. Whereas what we're really discovering about technology addiction is that it's highly, highly individualized. And that each person who gets addicted to a technology may do so for particular reasons. And that if we really want to understand how to develop healthy relationships with video games, we need to understand what about this makes it unhealthy, and that it's not uniform for particular people.
And what about a specific boy or girl makes it potentially damaging? Because, you know, my two sons are gamers. They've played with the same games from time to time. They don't react the same, even though the game is the same. Because, you know, one is quieter, one is more active and a worse winner and a worse loser. One's more creative. So, you know, taking into account what your child is like is just as important as the game itself.
Absolutely, and I think that's where, remember that there are thousands and thousands of video games. So which video game someone chooses to play will tell you a little bit about what they're interested in. And what we found is a winning strategy to help parents and kids is to recognize, ask your child, okay, what is it about the video game that you really love?
Right.
And then what we try to advocate for is to develop something that satisfies that same need, but in the external world. And instead of coming up with generic solutions, coming up with personalized solutions
Right.
for the child.
Yeah, because it's amazing to me in my work with families and students how, specifically in the case of parents and educators, the concept of younger generations in video games and technology and social media in general is how do I avoid the unhealthy use instead of how do I help build the healthy use, right? So what games should I look into if my child is so and so, or which might be the best social network to start with if my child is so and so. So now we're talking about mental health, and I have maybe a difficult question. Are we talking more constantly here in Spain lately about the impact of technology on mental health because there's evidence of that impact, or also because we're increasingly talking about mental health in general? We're sort of losing the taboo slowly, and then people are more easily led to say, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling frustrated. Is it a combination of both, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a lot of times we wonder, are the rates of diagnosis of mental illness, is it increasing because the world is getting worse? Or are the rates of diagnosis increasing because we're catching it more?
Right.
It's people have always been sick, but we've actually missed it. And I think actually it's a combination of both. So we do have actually good evidence that suggests that we are better at catching things, but especially when it comes to some things like autism spectrum disorder and especially things like ADHD, we actually know that the attention spans of children appear to be changing. And this is what we're sort of discovering if you even look at the evolution of technology. When I was growing up, I used to watch this show called Sesame Street. I don't know if
Right.
people are familiar. And the thing about Sesame Street is when you're watching TV as a kid, you sit there and Sesame Street gives you a story over 30 minutes. So my attention span was 30 minutes. But now if you look at things like apps, what we notice is that first there were blogs, and in order to engage with blogs, you had to read 3 pages. And that has now turned into Twitter, 160 characters. We started with YouTube, right, where people used to make 20-minute videos, 30-minute videos. Now we have TikTok, which is like 60 seconds or less. And so what we're discovering is that as the pace of technology is getting quicker, our brain no longer needs to pay attention for extended periods of time. And if you watch your child on an iPad, what you'll find is that they scroll quickly, right? They get bored of something, they click on the next thing, they click on the next thing, they click on the next thing. So they don't have to, they kind of give in to their boredom, and they rely on the technology to give them stimulation instead of training their mind to pay attention to something for an extended period of time.
Right.
So I think we are seeing a technological impact on our attention as a whole.
And are, say, 15-year-olds who play video games right now more depressed than 15-year-olds 10 years ago? Or are they more open to saying, I don't feel okay? Or are different aspects of the environment and context, like COVID and lockdown, also impacting on their situation and their feelings of not being okay?
Yeah, so I think it's all three, actually. So COVID had an impact. I think we are more aware and more open to talking about negative feelings, but I do think that people are worse. So this is, I know it's kind of bizarre, and then the question is kind of why. So if you look at every field of medicine, we're winning when it comes to medicine. So now we can take, if your heart gives out today, we can take a heart from another human being and stick it in your body and let you live for 20 years. We can replace kidneys, we can replace lungs, we can give you different kinds of anti-cancer therapies. So we're winning when it comes to every branch of medicine except for psychiatry. It's the one place where outcomes are actually getting worse over the course of like the entire globe. And so why is that? I think that we know from studies, for example, and y'all may have seen this as well, where the more time you spend on social media, the more negatively it impacts your mood. So I'll give you all just a simple example of this. I'm living my life, right? And I have good days and I have bad days. It's a normal life. Everyone knows that we have good days and bad days. But what do I see when I log on to social media? What I see is one person had a birthday party today. Look at how many people are having fun. And the next day, I see another birthday party where everyone is having fun. And the next day, I see another birthday party where everyone is having fun. Now, each person only gets one birthday a year. But every time I log onto social media, what rises to the top is what is liked the most, where people are having the most fun. Does that kind of make sense? So every time I log on, what I'm seeing is the best moment of 365 lives. And then what it gives me the impression of is everyone is out there having fun all of the time. And I only get one birthday a year. But everyone else is having so much fun all the time. So it creates this false sense that everyone out there is living this perfect life, whereas my life is just ordinary. And in the face of a perfect life, ordinary lives feel depressing.
I completely agree with you, but maybe then my conversation, say, with my 14-year-old daughter, who has an account on Instagram and is experiencing that, and is, in my mind, not addicted to Instagram, but to the experiences she lives through Instagram with her peers or with other people, then my conversation with her is not that much about what Instagram is doing to her, but how to understand what other people are doing in Instagram, why they're doing it, and how that is impacting on her, and why. Again, it's not telling her social media and your smartphone are damaging you. It's technology is there as a bridge that users use, and it has an impact on you. And I think that narrative is very different to the screens are making you unhappy.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting why people use Instagram and to try to understand that. So this is something that I personally dislike about technology. So we're healthy gamers, so we're not for quitting video games. I still play video games. I think it's about learning a healthy relationship with technology because it's not going anywhere. But so I'm visiting Spain for the second time in my life, and I'm thrilled to be here, and I hope to go to a museum. One thing that I've noticed over my life is now when I visit somewhere, and people are at this museum and there's beautiful artwork, what are people doing? Are they appreciating the art?
They're looking at their phones.
They're taking pictures, right? So what we've started to do in society is that it's more important to take a picture of me with a piece of art than it is for me to appreciate the piece of art. I visited Iceland this last summer, and there's a beautiful waterfall. What's everyone doing? 300 people taking pictures of the waterfall, so that they can remember the waterfall instead of enjoying being there. And this is what Instagram is kind of doing. This is what all of these things are doing, where now the display and memory of an experience is becoming more important than having the experience itself. And when we want to capture moments instead of enjoy them,
right,
that's why I think mental health is getting worse.
Okay, so I have to finish,
Yeah,
because they're giving me signs. I interrupted you, sorry. But
It's
my
all good.
last question. So a healthy gamer, what's a healthy use of games or tech? What does it mean, healthy use?
It's a great question. So when we think about addiction, what we think of as addiction is something that impairs your function. So it impacts your academic life, your professional life, your physical health, your relationships, your mental health.
Right.
So what I consider healthy technology use is technology use that doesn't hurt you, right? So it's the ability to be able to stop. It's the ability to actually enjoy the technology that you use.
Right.
And what we sort of see is that the first half hour or hour that you play a video game, it's actually fun. But by hour 2, by hour 3, by hour 4, we actually see that the enjoyment goes down. And that's when we fall into an addiction, because we're using the thing, but we're not even having fun.
Right.
So what we try to encourage is for people to understand, okay, how much enjoyment are you having from the technology? Do you want to take a couple of pictures? Absolutely. You should take a couple pictures to remember. But what you want to remember is how much you enjoyed looking at that work of art, how much you enjoyed being there, how much you enjoyed being with those people. It's to evoke a memory, not to replace it.
Right. Nos tenemos que quedar aquí. Quizás una buena conclusión para todos los que somos padres, madres, educadores, estamos implicados en el acompañamiento de jóvenes, es entender que es tan importante conocer los videojuegos como conocer a los niños o adolescentes que tenemos, no a los que queremos tener, sino a los que tenemos, y entender que el mundo exterior les impacta de distintas maneras según sean ellos, y el principio del camino es responsabilidad nuestra acompañarlos para que hagan un uso saludable de la tecnología, que será distinto en cada uno de ellos. Y en el caso concreto de los videojuegos, quizás hacer el esfuerzo de jugar con ellos, de verlos jugar, de entender qué les aporta ese mundo del videojuego, en lugar de simplemente dejarnos llevar por el pánico o quejarnos de todos los conflictos que una consola, un videojuego, una pantalla, un móvil generan en casa. Gracias a todos. Thanks a lot for
Thank you so
today.
much.
Y
Thank
que
you very
tengan
much.
un buen día. Gracias.